On a bustling city bus, young Ava noticed an elderly man struggling to stand. Without a second thought, she offered him her seat, a simple act of kindness that anyone would commend. But as the man settled down, he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out something that made the entire bus go silent. The object he handed to Ava was so unexpected, it left every passenger speechless, their faces turning pale with awe. Ava had no idea what she had just been handed by the kind-looking old man. But she felt like other people did at least have an idea, as she suddenly felt a lot of eyes land on her. People started to whisper among each other, and some even pointed at her. All the while, the old man gave her a wink and started staring out the window. Ava quickly put the object in her pocket, but that did not stop the people on the bus from giving her attention. One man even came up to her and asked her if she could take that object out of her pocket so that he could have a look at it. Ava got really nervous and started shaking her head, but the man was not about to give up. In a desperate attempt, Ava rushed past the man and jumped out of the bus just before the doors closed, giving other passengers no chance to follow her. The bus continued on its journey and she saw dozens of pairs of eyes looking out the windows at her. Ava was left behind completely stunned. What had she just gotten herself into? She was still quite a while away from home, but there was no way she was going to wait here for another bus. Ava was way too afraid that passengers from her previous bus ride were going to get out at the next stop and come back to her. She needed to find another way to get home. But how? She was just a young girl and did not really have money on hand besides her bus card. She did know where she was, luckily, and which general direction her house was in. And so, Ava just started walking. She wanted to at least get away from the bus track. She also tried to call her mother a couple of times, but she was never available to answer the phone when she was working, and this was no different. The only other option Ava felt like she had was to call her father. But since her parents divorced about a year ago, he was living in a completely different state. He could not just pick her up or something. And so there was no other choice but to walk and hope she could find her house. But the object she had just gotten from the old man was burning in her pocket. She desperately wanted to have another look at it and try to figure out what it was exactly. But she was very afraid to do this in any place where people could see her. What if she again focused all that attention on herself because of it? This time, there was no bus she could quickly escape from. She was completely left to the mercy of those people then. After about 15 minutes of fighting her curiosity, and with her neighborhood still nowhere in sight, Ava could not take it anymore. She looked around her to see if anybody was watching, and then quickly made her way into a dark alley. When she was sure there was nobody around, Ava pulled the object out of her pocket to have a better look at it, and she could just not understand what all the fuzz had been about. It was just looking like a small little electronic device. She had no idea what the purpose could be, but she was fairly sure that this could not be that valuable or rare or something. But then why had the old man been so adamant that she had to keep it on her person at all costs? When she was still busy inspecting the object, Ava suddenly heard something behind her. She quickly turned around and saw that somebody had also walked the alley. It was dark, so she could not really make out any features. All she knew was that the person was very big, and then asked her what a little girl like her was doing in a place like this. Ava's heart dropped at that moment. This was exactly the kind of situation that her mother had warned her about. Stay away from strangers. Ava looked around and saw that there was no escape, and the unknown man started coming closer and closer. Ava started to beg and ask if she could just leave, but her request was not honored at all. The man told her that she was going to come with him, and if she just trusted him and did not resist, that there would be no trouble then. Ava was getting more and more scared, but the man quickly revealed that she had nothing to fear. When he took Ava back into the street, he showed her his badge. It turned out that the man was an off-duty police officer. He had been following Ava for a little while when he saw her walking alone. He was a bit concerned seeing as she was still so young, and when she suddenly went into a dark alleyway, He figured it was the right moment to start asking some questions, and this admission had calmed Ava down a lot, but she was unsure of what she was supposed to do now. The police officers wanted an answer, but Ava did not want to show him the device that she had gotten from the old man. She was still haunted by the reaction it had gotten from the people on the bus. And so, Ava tried to come up with a lie. She told the officer that she had simply gotten off at the wrong bus stop and decided to walk home. Ava, still trembling from her ordeal, was startled when a voice called out to her. Turning, she saw a man in plain clothes, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. He introduced himself as an off-duty police officer and asked if she needed help. Warily, Ava glanced at the man, wondering if she could trust this stranger, even if he was a police officer. After a moment's hesitation, Ava nodded, accepting the offer for a ride home. The fear of the unknown was slightly less daunting than the thought of walking alone. As she climbed into the car, a mix of relief and apprehension washed over her. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her mind racing with what the officer's intentions might be. The officer, trying to ease the tension, started a conversation. He asked Ava about her day, her school, and why she was so far from home. Ava sat stiffly, answering in short, non-committal responses. She was acutely aware of the device in her pocket, a heavy secret that she wasn't ready to share with this stranger. Ava's answers were vague, skirting around the truth. She mentioned missing her bus stop and deciding to walk, leaving out the encounter with the old man and the whispers on the bus. The officer glanced at her occasionally, sensing there was more to her story. Ava felt his eyes on her and tightened her grip on the mysterious device in her pocket. As the car neared her neighborhood, the officer's concern grew. He sensed Ava's unease and her reluctance to share the whole story. He wondered what could have scared a young girl so much that she'd prefer to walk alone at night. Ava gazed out the window, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, wondering if she had made the right decision in trusting this stranger. As the officer's car pulled up to her house, Ava felt a rush of urgency. She muttered a quick thank you and hurriedly opened the door, eager to escape the confines of the vehicle and the officer's probing questions. Her heart pounded as she stepped out, her mind racing with thoughts of the device and the unknown dangers it might bring. In her haste, Ava didn't notice the small device slipping from her pocket, falling silently onto the car floor. It lay there, an inconspicuous piece of metal and plastic, its significance unbeknownst to anyone but her. She closed the car door behind her, unaware that she had just left behind the very thing that had caused her so much distress. The officer, preparing to drive away, glanced down and spotted the fallen device. His eyes narrowed in recognition, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. He picked it up, examining it closely, his mind racing with implications. Yet, he chose to remain silent, pondering the best course of action, knowing that revealing his recognition might scare Ava further. Ava walked away, her back to the officer in the car, oblivious to the officer's discovery. The officer watched her retreating figure, the device held tightly in his hand. He was torn between calling out to her and keeping his discovery to himself. Finally, he tucked the device into his pocket, deciding to investigate further before revealing anything. Left alone in his car, the officer gazed at the spot where Ava had stood, a multitude of questions swirling in his mind. Why had Ava been so nervous? What was the significance of this device? His duty as an officer urged him to find answers, but he also felt a responsibility to protect the frightened young girl he had just encountered. Upon entering her home, the walls seemed to close in on Ava. The weight of her secret, now heavier without the physical presence of the device, was unbearable. She found her mother in the kitchen, and with a trembling voice, Ava began to unravel the day's events. The fear and confusion she had bottled up came pouring out, her words tumbling over each other in haste. Ava's mother listened with growing alarm, her her face etching deeper with worry and confusion at every word. She moved closer, her hands reaching out to comfort Ava. The story, with its mysterious old man and the enigmatic device, sounded like something out of a suspense novel, not something her daughter should ever have experienced. Her mind raced with concern for Ava's safety. Ava recounted everything: the crowded bus, the old man's strange behavior, and the whispers of the passengers. She described the device in detail, her mother hanging on to every word. Ava's voice shook as she spoke of the panic that drove her off the bus and the ensuing encounter with the off-duty officer. Her mother's eyes widened with every revelation, disbelief mingled with fear. With the gravity of the situation settling in, Ava's mother knew they needed help. She suggested they go to the police, hoping they could shed some light on the mysterious device and perhaps find the old man. Ava nodded, a sense of urgency replacing her initial hesitation. Together, they decided to seek answers from those who were trained to handle such perplexing events. That night, Ava lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The day's events replayed in her mind like a relentless loop. She tossed and turned, the absence of the device doing nothing to ease her unease. Her thoughts were a jumble of fear, curiosity, and a deep sense of foreboding. Sleep eluded her, and the night stretched on, filled with shadows and whispers of uncertainty. The next morning, Ava and her mother arrived at the police station, a building that loomed large and imposing. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the buzz of activity. Ava clutched her mother's hand, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and a desperate hope for answers. They approached the front desk, their story ready to be told once again. An officer led them to a small room where Ava was asked to describe the old man. She focused hard, trying to recall every detail of his face, his clothes, and his demeanor. A police sketch artist listened intently, his pencil moving swiftly across the paper. Ava watched, her heart in her throat, as the face of the old man slowly emerged on the page. Ava sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the sketch. It was like seeing a ghost from that strange day on the bus. She answered the officer's questions mechanically, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. The reality of cooperating with a police investigation, something far removed from her everyday life, made the situation feel even more surreal and unsettling. Throughout the questioning, Ava's mother remained by her side, a steady presence in the whirlwind of confusion. She offered reassuring touches and encouraging nods, her eyes filled with concern and love. Her support was a silent promise that she was there for Ava, no matter how strange or frightening the journey might become. As they finished, the officer in charge assured them that they would do everything to investigate the matter thoroughly. His voice was firm, imbued with a somewhat comforting professionalism. He explained the next steps and promised to keep them informed. Ava and her mother left the station, the weight of uncertainty slightly eased by the promise of action. Days later, the police called with unexpected news. They had identified the old man from Ava's sketch. His face, once just a fleeting memory, had led them to a name and an address. Ava's heart raced as she listened to the officer on the phone. The mysterious figure from the bus was no longer just a shadow. He was a real person, now within the grasp of the law. The pace of events quickened. The police moved swiftly, apprehending the old man at his residence. Ava learned of the arrest with a mix of shock and disbelief. The man who had silently handed her the device, who had sparked so much fear and mystery, was now in custody. The news brought a surreal sense of reality crashing down around her. Ava sat in her room, processing the news of the arrest. Relief washed over her, knowing that the man was no longer a looming threat. But this relief was tangled with confusion and a strange sense of guilt. Why had he chosen her for his mysterious gift? What had been his intention? These questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and unsettling. doubt crept into Ava's thoughts. The old man's act, initially seeming like a gesture of kindness, now appeared dubious. What had appeared as a simple act of gratitude on the bus had escalated into something far more complex and potentially sinister. Ava found herself reevaluating that moment on the bus, wondering if there had been a hidden agenda behind his smile. In the following days, Ava and her mother waited anxiously for more information. Each ring of the phone sent a jolt of anticipation through the house. Ava longed for answers that would make sense of the chaos, for a revelation that would bring closure to the mystery. Yet each passing day only seemed to stretch the shadows of uncertainty longer and deeper. In the interrogation room, the old man sat across from the detectives, his face an unreadable mask. The police probed his motives, asking pointed questions about his encounter with Ava and the mysterious device. His answers were met with skepticism, his every word scrutinized. The room was thick with tension, as the police worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind his actions. The old man maintained his innocence throughout the questioning. His voice was steady, his eyes unwavering as he insisted that his intentions were benign. He spoke of a simple act of gratitude towards a kind stranger, a gesture misconstrued and blown out of proportion. His words painted a picture of misunderstanding, but the police were not easily swayed. Despite the old man's claims, doubt hung heavily in the air. The detectives exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of skepticism and uncertainty. His story, while plausible, lacked convincing evidence. The mystery of the device, coupled with Ava's distress, cast a shadow over his narrative. The truth remained elusive, just beyond their grasp. Ava, upon hearing of the old man's claims, found herself torn. The fear and confusion of that day on the bus collided with the possibility of a simple misunderstanding. Could she have misjudged the situation? Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, each thought wrestling with the next. The man's face, once kind in her memory, now flickered with ambiguity. As the investigation continued, Ava grappled with the complexity of the situation, the reality of being involved in a police investigation, of her actions potentially having unforeseen consequences, weighed heavily on her. She lay awake at night, pondering the myriad possibilities, the potential truths, and lies intertwined in the old man's story. The burden of the unknown pressed down on her, a relentless force. The police delved into the old man's past, searching for clues that might shed light on the present. Records were pulled, acquaintances interviewed, and every fragment of his history was examined under a microscope. Each piece seemed to add to an intricate puzzle, but the picture remained unclear. The old man's life was a tapestry of ordinary and obscure, leaving the detectives to sift through the threads for truth. As the investigation progressed, new details about the device began to emerge. It was unlike anything the police had seen before, its technology advanced and purpose obscure. Experts were called in, their analysis deepening the mystery rather than dispelling it. The device, once just a curious object, now stood at the heart of a complex web of questions. The more the police learned about the old man, the more questions arose. His past was a blend of the mundane and the enigmatic, a life that didn't seem to align with the gravity of the current situation. There were no clear indications of malicious intent, yet nothing to definitively prove his innocence either. The old man remained an enigma, his history a puzzle yet to be solved. Ava felt the strain of the ongoing investigation. Each new revelation, each unanswered question added to the weight she carried. The uncertainty of it all gnawed at her, the old man's ambiguous role in her life becoming a source of continuous anxiety. The simplicity of her everyday life seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the complexity of the situation she had unwittingly become a part of. Gradually, the true nature of the device began to come into focus. The layers of mystery started to peel away, revealing glimpses of its purpose and potential. It was a breakthrough moment in the investigation, a turning point that promised answers but also hinted at new complexities. Ava and her mother awaited these revelations with bated breath, hopeful yet apprehensive about what the truth might bring. Ava wrestled with a growing sense of guilt. Had her actions inadvertently caused harm? She replayed the events over and over in her mind, each time questioning her decisions. The weight of what had unfolded since that day on the bus pressed heavily on her, mingling with confusion. She wondered if she could have done anything differently if her involvement had escalated the situation. In quieter moments, Ava found herself reconsidering her initial impression of the old man. His kind demeanor on the bus, the gentle way he had handed her the device. All these memories conflicted with the current whirlwind of suspicion and fear. Could a simple act of kindness have been so grossly misinterpreted? She grappled with the disparity between her memories and the unfolding reality. Ava felt torn, her emotions a tumultuous sea of sympathy and suspicion. One part of her empathized with the old man, wondering if he was just a misunderstood figure caught in an unfortunate series of events. Yet, another part harbored doubts, fueled by the mysterious nature of the device and the old man's elusive past. This internal conflict left her feeling unsettled and divided. In these trying times, Ava turned to her family for comfort. Her mother's embrace and her father's reassuring voice over the phone were the anchors that kept her grounded amidst the chaos. They didn't have all the answers, but their presence offered a respite from the storm of uncertainty. In her family's care, Ava found a haven of understanding and support. Together, Ava and her family braced for the final revelations of the investigation. The house was thick with anticipation, each ring of the phone or knock on the door stirring a flurry of emotions. They knew that the answers they sought could bring closure or further complications. Despite the uncertainty, there was a collective desire to face whatever truths lay ahead. The investigation reached a pivotal moment when the device was finally identified as a sophisticated tracking device. This revelation sent shockwaves through Ava and her family. The innocuous object that had seemed so harmless now revealed its sinister potential. The implications were alarming, and Ava felt a chill run down her spine as she considered the extent of the invasion of her privacy. The police, armed with this new information, began to question the old man's motives with renewed intensity. What had driven him to give such a device to a young girl? Was it an act of malice, or something more benign, but equally misguided? The detectives sifted through his statements, looking for inconsistencies, trying to piece together the truth behind his actions. Ava's family struggled to come to terms with the revelation. The presence of a tracking device raised serious concerns for their safety and privacy. Discussions filled the household, veering between fear, anger, and disbelief. The trust they had in the world, in the kindness of strangers, had been shaken. They held each other a little tighter, the sense of security they once took for granted now fractured. The old man's full story was laid bare, revealing a complex web of intentions and actions. The police shared the details with Ava and her family, who listened with bated breath. The truth was more intricate and less sinister than they had feared, but it still left them grappling with mixed feelings about the old man and his actions. In the aftermath, the police had to decide on the appropriate consequences for the old man. His intentions, now understood to be less malevolent but still recklessly misguided, presented a legal and moral dilemma. As the legal process unfolded, Ava watched from a distance, her emotions a tangled knot. The conclusion of this saga would mark the end of a chapter in her life, but the experience would forever linger in her memory. In the quiet aftermath, Ava spent long hours reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She had learned hard lessons about trust and caution in a world more complex than she had realized. The experience had taught her the importance of balancing kindness with wariness, of listening to her intuition. These lessons, though learned under difficult circumstances, were now an indelible part of her growth. The ordeal brought Ava a deeper understanding of human complexities. She realized that people are not simply good or bad, but a mixture of many traits and motivations. This insight allowed her to view others with more empathy and less judgment, acknowledging that everyone has their own story, their own struggles, and their own truths that might not be immediately apparent. Ava and her family slowly found closure as they processed the ordeal together. Discussions around the dinner table became less about the incident and more about their feelings and healing. They learned to let go of the fear and uncertainty that had gripped them, choosing instead to focus on the strength and resilience they had discovered within themselves and each other. The old man, after facing the legal consequences of his actions, received a judgment that balanced his intentions with the impact of his actions. Ava followed the proceedings with a sense of detached curiosity, no longer feeling the acute emotional connection to the case. She understood that his fate was a result of his actions, separate from her own journey of healing and understanding. As Ava moved forward, she carried with her the wisdom gained from this unexpected journey. She looked towards the future with a sense of newfound understanding, tempered by the knowledge that the world was more nuanced than she had once thought. With a heart open to learning and a mind sharpened by experience, Ava stepped confidently into the next chapter of her life.